about look at Diddy, for instance. Let's take a look at him. Let's take a look at, he has videos. He has videos of the parties. Now, what I've heard, which I don't know how much of it is in mainstream media, I don't really follow the story that much, but what I've heard from friends that are attorneys, friends of mine that have represented me before, agents and so on, is there's a bidding war going on right now.
The fall of Sean Diddy Combs looks like something out of a script that even Hollywood would have tossed aside for being too outlandish. The empire he built on glamour, bravado, and billion-dollar branding is now collapsing under the weight of federal indictments, court filings that read like thrillers, and whispers that he wasn't just a Playboy mogul, but the mastermind behind one of the darkest mysteries in music history. Prosecutors say racketeering exploitation rings and secret tapes could put him behind bars for life. His name has surfaced nearly 50 times in sealed police transcripts connected to the ambush that ended Shah Secure's reign in Las Vegas. And while Diddy pleads innocence in a New York courtroom, former allies are starting to talk loudly.
I think that they don't want, if they was in any of those freak-off tapes, if they played a part in any of those Diddy sessions, they don't want it to get out to the general public to make up their brand.
Enter Gene Deal, the ex-bodyguard who saw it all from inside the armored SUV convoys and penthouse suite. Deal has now dropped a revelation so staggering that it makes the charges against Diddy look like just one piece of a far bigger puzzle. According to him, Shocker was never the naive hothead the press painted him to be. He was playing a deeper game. He knew the setup was coming. He understood how high the bounty on his head had climbed, and instead of waiting for his enemies to close in, he staged his own exit deal. Hints that the legendary rapper turned his Avila persona into a blueprint for survival. He deceived his would-be executioners, vanished from American soil, and slipped into a new life abroad under a different name. And here's the kicker. Even Diddy himself, the man who thought he had arranged for Shocker to be erased, was fooled. That is the ultimate irony. Imagine Diddy sitting in boardrooms and basking in platinum plaques, certain he had removed the only rival who could dismantle him, never knowing that the supposed casualty had simply sidestepped the hit. Gene Deal's testimony makes it clear. Diddy may have believed he pulled the strings, but in reality he was outmaneuvered. The image of him gloating in private, believing he held the crown unchallenged, only to discover decades later that his nemesis might still be alive somewhere, is almost Shakespearean. It reframes the entire East Coast, West Coast saga, shifting it from tragedy into something closer to a long con.
Him and Big went through their thing, and I was big man. That was the extent of our beef.
And the hints were there all along. Fans obsessed over the Don Ty album with its eerie subtitle, The 7-Day Theory, and the cryptic line, "Exit Shocker, enter Machiavelli." They pointed out that when you rearrange Machiavelli, it spells out him alive. For years, those details were dismissed as morbid Easter eggs. A young man fixated on death. But what if they were instructions? A public code laid out by an artist who had studied Niccolo Machiavelli's treatises on deception and survival. If Deal is right, the album wasn't a requiem. It was a declaration of intent. Consider, too, the strange inconsistencies that surfaced in official records. The coroner's report listed Shocker at 6 feet tall, 215 pounds, but friends and family knew him as 5'10", 168. The autopsy photo with its blurred tattoos and awkward angles never sat right with the public. And then there's the cremator who supposedly handled Shocker's remains, retiring immediately afterward, vanishing without a trace. That single disappearance became the spark for decades of rumor was the man's silence because he played a part in swapping bodies. Was the supposed corpse even Shocker at all?
I'm sorry, I'm just really, I'm in this moment right now. This is crazy. Sorry. People don't really know how much what it does to you when something that you love is taken from you and thrown away like it don't even matter, and then they move on with their lives and you're stuck. You're stuck during those years. You're still stuck 21 years later.
Stories multiply when you look beyond the paperwork. One former security officer, Michael, Nice, swore to TMZ that he personally helped smuggle Shah Secure out of the country after a hit was ordered. He claimed Fidel Castro sanctioned the operation and even signed off on a body switch to sell the illusion. According to Nice, Shocker wasn't gunned down in Vegas. He was spirited onto a jet with Panthers at his side, flown to Barbados, and finally delivered to Cuba. He remembered Shocker himself acting as co-pilot, shaking hands with his rescuers, as if stepping straight into his own legend. Nice was later found gone under mysterious circumstances, just as he'd promised to reveal proof, convenient coincidence, or another casualty in the effort to keep the secret buried. And yet the sightings keep rolling in. Havana locals whisper of seeing a man who looks uncannily like Shocker strolling old Havana in a bandana and sunglasses. The beard thicker, the shoulders broader, but the eyes unmistakable. Others insist he's been spotted in Belize, even New Jersey. The internet still circulates images of Shocker standing next to Beyoncé or 50 Cent grainy and easily dismissed as doctored, but compelling enough to feed the feed. The Fox Suge Knight himself once mused from behind bars, "Why you think nobody?" Been arrested if they said they the one that took Shocker out, because Shaku are not gone. He's somewhere smoking a Cuban cigar. The more we trace these threads, the more it feels like we're staring at an elaborate stage play rather than a crime scene. Even Shocker's own mother once said her son chose to leave quietly. What did she mean? Was it a slip, a poetic turn of phrase, or a coded acknowledgement that he walked away on his own terms? And how do we explain the endless stream of posthumous albums? Each one sounding uncannily fresh, as though the voice behind them was never silenced at all.
And then what's the stuff that's happening with Wendy Williams? Do you think this is all connection to?
Of course.
All of this leads us back to Gene Deal's assertion that Shocker wasn't caught off guard, but saw the betrayal coming. He knew the cost of independence in an industry where moguls played kingmakers and enforcers in equal measure. He refused to bow, and when the bounty on his head reached into the millions, he flipped the game board over entirely. He turned envy from a stage name into a survival manual, and he might have built an exile life far from the cameras, which means the greatest twist of all is still possible. Shocker returning when the timing is right, ready to expose the men who thought they had destroyed him. The first cracks in the illusion came through the story of a body. Double rumors spread that another man already deceased was swapped into Shocker's hospital bed to stage the final act. The coroner's discrepancies became the evidence, the rushed cremation, the smoking gun. In this theory, the chaos outside the hospital that night wasn't panic. It was choreography. By the time Suge Knight walked out with bandages and shock on his face, Shocker was already on his way to a runway, hidden under aliases, sliding into the Caribbean night. The world was left with blurred photos and official statements, while the man himself slipped beyond reach. And now as Diddy sits shackled by federal charges, accused of coercion, trafficking, and running his empire like a criminal enterprise. The irony burns hotter than ever. He may genuinely believe he orchestrated the perfect crime back in 1996, that he rid himself of the West Coast threat once and for all. But if Shocker is truly out there waiting, watching, then Diddy has been living a hollow victory. And if the day comes when Shocker steps back into the spotlight, revealing the greatest vanishing act in music history, everything Diddy built will collapse in an instant, because nothing would haunt him more than realizing the man he thought was gone had been alive all along.
Unfortunately, we're all going to take a disgusting trip to his seedy, awful world. You know, the man has no class. He has no kindness in his dark, dark heart. And he's depraved. That's my opinion. This is a depraved, disgusting individual about whom I wish to hear nothing after this trial is done.
The discrepancies, the whispered confessions, the sightings, the autopsy oddities, they all collide into a single unnerving possibility. What if the night in Vegas was never an ending, but a beginning? What if the bullets were just the backdrop for a disappearing act pulled off with the precision of a master strategist? What if the real Shocker has been living under our noses for nearly 3 decades, waiting for the perfect moment to reemerge? And if that's true, then the story isn't over. In fact, it may only just be reaching the point where Diddy's darkest fears come to life behind the swirling smoke of theories. There's one thread that feels impossible to ignore. The Black Panther Shocker wasn't just an artist pulled into industry feuds. He was born into a family steeped in activism and rebellion. His mother, Afeni Shocker, was a Panther herself, and his godfather was a militant organizer who spent decades in conflict with federal agencies. With roots that deep, it's not hard to imagine a safety net waiting when his life in LA became too dangerous. Some insiders insist the night of the Vegas shooting wasn't just chaos. It was the trigger for a carefully executed extraction carried out by people who had spent their lives working in the shadows. If any network had the means, the discipline, and the motivation to sneak him out under the government's nose, it was them. And what better symbol of resistance than preserving the life of the most outspoken rapper of his generation?
So, Terrence Howard appeared on the PBD podcast with Patrick Bet-David, and the episode, this premiered on April 4th. Definitely making the rounds because in this episode, Terrence Howard describes an interaction with Diddy where he says that he believes that Diddy was trying to have sex with him. Let's take a listen.
Let's take a listen. That connection gains weight when we consider his Aunt Assata Shocker, who remains one of the most wanted women in America after escaping a prison sentence and resurfacing in Cuba. If she could vanish from federal custody and find protection on an island sworn to defy Washington, why couldn't her nephew follow the same path? It's whispered that the same channels that smuggled Assata to Havana were later reopened for Shocker. For the Panthers, it wasn't just about saving a famous voice, it was about protecting a legacy, shielding the son of the movement and ensuring his words could never be silenced completely. Every lyric about fighting the system, every verse about refusing to bow, it all became proof that he was more than an entertainer. He was a symbol they could not afford to lose. That brings us back to Michael. Nice, the man who came forward with a story almost too cinematic to believe. He describes Shocker boarding a private jet flanked by Panther operat, with adrenaline in the air like prisoners escaping a fortress. Nice said, "It was me, my brother, the pilot Shocker as the co-pilot, and 2 Panther guys on the jet. We took off and immediately knew we were safe. We felt good, and it was like escaping from prison." According to his account, the operation wasn't improvised, it was sanctioned. He claimed Fidel Castro himself signed off on the plan setting conditions for Shocker's exile. Stay quiet, never admit he was alive, never risk exposure that could drag Cuba into international scandal.
Same thing for Jeffrey Epstein. Now, the interesting thing about the Epstein and the theory about Epstein is we know he filmed people for sure on that island. He has a lot of movies, a lot of films of people that are very, very powerful political figures, and entertainers, business people. So, do you really believe that Jeffrey Epstein killed himself? Of course not. Of course not. Yeah.
Let's take a listen. That connection gains weight when we consider his Aunt Assata Shocker, who remains one of the most wanted women in America after escaping a prison sentence and resurfacing in Cuba. If she could vanish from federal custody and find protection on an island sworn to defy Washington, why couldn't her nephew follow the same path? It's whispered that the same channels that smuggled Assata to Havana were later reopened for Shocker. For the Panthers, it wasn't just about saving a famous voice, it was about protecting a legacy, shielding the son of the movement and ensuring his words could never be silenced completely. Every lyric about fighting the system, every verse about refusing to bow, it all became proof that he was more than an entertainer. He was a symbol they could not afford to lose. That brings us back to Michael. Nice. The man who came forward with a story almost too cinematic to believe. He describes Shocker boarding a private jet flanked by Panther operat, with adrenaline in the air like prisoners escaping a fortress. Nice said, "It was me, my brother, the pilot Shocker as the co-pilot, and 2 Panther guys on the jet. We took off and immediately knew we were safe. We felt good, and it was like escaping from prison." According to his account, the operation wasn't improvised, it was sanctioned. He claimed Fidel Castro himself signed off on the plan setting conditions for Shocker's exile. Stay quiet, never admit he was alive, never risk exposure that could drag Cuba into international scandal.
I can't wait. I can't wait for everybody to find out what's really been going on in the background.
Yeah, but here's where the plot thickens. Just when Michael Nice promised he was about to reveal hard proof, he was reported gone. Fans who followed his interviews don't see that as coincidence. Was it failing health? Bad luck, or was he silenced to ensure the truth about Shockers? Survival stayed buried forever. Nice's own colleagues admitted his passing came at the most convenient moment possible, preventing documents, tapes, or testimony from ever reaching the public eye. When someone that close to the fire disappears, suddenly suspicion doesn't fade. It spreads, even the details Nice revealed before his exit raised chilling possibilities. He spoke about a body switch in the hospital, large sums of money changing hands, and a double being used to play the part of a lifeless Shocker. He described the moment of relief once the jet reached Barbados before the final handoff to Cuba. If those claims are accurate, it would mean the entire Vegas spectacle was a cover, an elaborate theater piece staged for the media while the real man was already slipping across international waters. The Panthers provided the muscle, Castro provided the sanctuary, and Shocker provided the deception. The perfect trinity for survival.
Just different things that's not really beef though. That's just competitive.
Competitiveness.
All right, so you and Diddy, you and Puff cool?
No, I don't really rock with him.
Life in exile is never as romantic as the rumors make it sound. For someone like Shocker, a man who thrived on public energy and constant reinvention, being forced into decades of silence would not just be a strategy. It would be a punishment cut off from the roar of crowds, stripped of the adrenaline of performance. Every day would feel like a slow erosion of identity. Exile demands invisibility, and invisibility can suffocate. The longer he stayed hidden, the more the charismatic poet of the 90s may have hardened into something else entirely shaped by solitude and secrecy rather than applause. Psychologists often describe long-term isolation as a kind of rebirth. The person who enters hiding rarely emerges the same if they emerge at all. For Shocker, the transformation could have been profound. His art was always about rebellion and survival. But exile might have sharpened those instincts into something darker. Paranoia, distrust, a constant awareness that betrayal could strike again, decades of blending into the background. Watching the world evolve without him might have turned him into an observer rather than a participant. The Shocker that fans worshipped was young, fiery, unafraid. The Shocker of today, if he lives, may be someone whose fire burns differently, less as a blaze, more as a slow, relentless ember.
Is he this gangster that behind the scenes is that him? Or is that
Shout out to Wendy Williams.
And that raises a haunting question. If he were to step out of hiding now, would we even recognize him, not just in the lines on his face or the weight of years, but in his very essence? Could a man shaped by decades of enforced silence and secrecy still embody the same ideals, or would he return with a worldview warped by exile? Perhaps his reemergence would shock us, not because he's alive, but because he's unrecognizable. A man forged in shadows, carrying truths too heavy for the stage. He once dominated that possibility makes the stakes of his return even higher because what confronts Diddy may not be the Shocker of the past, but a version molded by survival itself. Now we face the darker question. Why has he stayed hidden for so long? If exile was meant to protect him, why not return once the danger faded? That's where the story collides with Diddy again. In some versions of the tale, Diddy gave Shocker a brutal ultimatum: disappear or face a permanent end. The alleged bounty, the so-called millions for a head, was more than just a gangland rumor. It was a warning that there would be no safe corner of America for him, forced to choose between vanishing and risking a public showdown. Shocker picked exile in a twisted way. Diddy's own ambition might have been the spark that forced the legend into hiding, transforming what should have been a grim finale into one of the greatest disappearances in music history.